Do you ever wonder how safe your information online is? Of course you do. Every week there seems to be some new data breach. Yesterday it was Parliament's turn. Australia's security agencies are investigating whether Beijing might have been behind a cyber breach of Parliament's computer system yesterday.
So what are the wider implications of this breach? Mark Pesce is a futurist, author and educator, and he joins us now in the studio. Mark, thanks for coming in this morning. Just tell us exactly what happened yesterday so we're all up to date.
I think the facts are somewhat thin on the ground, other than they think that there was an intrusion in the Parliament House network. They think no files were read. But again, this is where we go. We don't know. We don't know who did it. We don't know what they were after. We don't know if they left anything behind. So in some sense, all we have is a whole lot of questions that are very deeply concerning and no answers.
Mark, the reason why I wanted to talk to you about this is because these news of breaches comes so thick and fast that I think we're at risk of getting breach fatigue a little bit and just going, you know what, all of my information's out there. I don't know why they're stealing it. I don't know what they're doing with it. Everyone's got it. What's going on? Why does it matter? What is it likely that they... Suppose that my information is now in a database somewhere in China. Suppose it was the Chinese.
Right.
Well, why should I care about that?
If it's your data specifically as an individual, you may or may not care. If you're traveling to China or trying to get a visa to China, maybe you do care about that. If you're doing business with a Chinese company, maybe you do. So it's all of the ways that that data might be shared for advantage, either for strategic advantage or for commercial advantage. So those are the reasons you might be concerned about that. I think when we're talking about Parliament House, there may be strategic documents about what we're doing in the Pacific Islands right now, because we're really doing a diplomatic effort to fight back against the Chinese coming in with their own. So are we playing a game around that? Are they trying to outthink us or outmaneuver us by seeing what we're doing? And these are the questions that you start to ask, but you also start to ask the questions around, if I walk into Parliament House, can I trust any of the computers that I'm using there, or has a little present been left behind by someone who visited that's now going to take that information and replicate it quietly and copy it to another server somewhere in the world?
I suppose one of the big problems with this particular breach is that it undermines our institutions, our parliament, and I guess that sows mistrust.
Absolutely. If we're heading into an election right now, and the last thing that we really need is to have distrust in the fundamental institutions that are supporting the election. If you take a look at what happened in America 2 years ago, where there was an enormous amount of distrust that was sown during an election cycle, it makes having an election that much more difficult. So you don't really want to undermine the basic institutions that are supporting the electoral process while the election is taking place.
Mark, when you say that you don't know whether or not the hackers have left behind a little present in the computer, we don't know whether or not there might be something that's spying on what I do if I used a computer in Parliament House, for example, now that we've had this alleged breach. What would such a thing be? I mean, would they be spying on my keystrokes on a computer? Would they be taking my logins? Would they simply be tracking what websites I go to? And why is that important information? And also, are our intelligence agencies good enough that they should be able to catch such a thing? I would hope that on Parliament House computers, if that did happen, that they'd know.
Well, this is always going to be a cat and mouse game, because as they discover one technique and they can detect it, someone will develop a technique that maybe will remain for a period of time invisible to them until they detect it. Probably what you would do is you'd look for the weakest link on that network, a computer that wasn't correctly secured, or an old piece of equipment that hadn't been kept to update. You know how we're always told to keep our computers and our smartphones updated? This is exactly why. And there's a lot of things on our networks now, and people lose track of them. And you can go around, you can find the weak link and put something on there that will simply watch all of the traffic. And maybe it doesn't know it's your traffic specifically, but it will record it and eventually send it on for analysis.
This is an environment that is constantly changing and adapting. Are we keeping pace with that change?
Well, I mean, I think we're always going to ask whether we're keeping pace with the change. What we need to do is we need to shift the focus of our efforts around thinking about security first, rather than something that we're doing after there's been a break-in. How do we think about making our systems secure from the beginning? And this is always going to be something we have a lot of tension around, because we do lock our houses even though we occasionally lose our keys. And so we need to think about how difficult it is to get other people to break in versus how easy it's going to be for us to run our country.
Okay, so I am resigned to the fact that the Chinese are going to try to spy on us, right? And I assume that they're resigned to the fact, they're probably having a conversation in Beijing right now saying, oh, you know what the Aussies and the Yanks and the Brits did? They've been putting information on they've been spying on our computers and systems as well. So let's put that aside and let's just talk about my personal data and information, maybe with private companies and so on. Since I can't care about everything in the space of data breaches and hacking, what should I care about?
Well, I mean, I think that's very much an individual question. For some people, it's going to be medical data. For some people, it's going to be dating data. So for some people, it's going to be financial data. And so I think you're going to prioritize based on what you think your own needs are, and then make sure that you have the right systems in place. And the hard thing is, for the average person, it's very hard to know. We are relying very much on other people saying, we've got this, we're going to protect you.
Well, that's the thing. I could have all the systems in place that I might want, but for example, I'm shopping around for some kind of cloud data solution so that I don't have to have my 3 old laptops, with information on them. I can just upload the hard drive and just know that it's somewhere. I don't know what security protocols each of these companies have or whether they're going to get hacked. I assume they probably will.
And this is an interesting area. So it's been very hard for these companies to get insurance around this sort of thing, because if your data gets stolen, you should be able to sue the company, right? Because that's the way you can keep them in check. If they know they're on the hook for this, they can't get insurance because it's almost hard for the insurance company to know if that company is secure enough that they can insure them safely. So it's as if we need to build an entire industry, the same way we did with banking, about how can you test to see if a bank is secure and not going to lose your money. We're going to need the same kind of industry built up around insurance, protection, defense around that for our data. Because until we have that, you will not be able to completely trust any firm that you're doing business with.
Okay. I don't know if I feel reassured.
So what does that look like, though? Is that a regulatory body, are you saying, that we'd need legislation?
There's probably going to be some regulatory bodies. There's going to be best practices. There's going to be peak bodies. And so there will probably be some practices, and you will be able to know whether an organization you're doing business with complies with best practice. And if there are failures, then yes, we will probably get regulators involved.
Okay, it's an interesting times ahead. I'm not sure if I feel reassured by that, but I appreciate you coming in to talk about us. Thanks very much, Mark Pesce.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.